Right. Hello everyone and welcome to the Global Dev Study third event with the Fireside Chat with the DHH organized by Fogwell. I'm Hon, the product manager at Groove, and I'm the host of today's event. So before we get started, I would like to share with you on how to participate in today's Fireside Chat. So you can see that there are a couple of times that you can ask questions to our guests, and you can do so via a web app called Slido. So if you would like to ask a question, please scan the Slido QR code on the screen, and you can ask a question in the Slido web app. So that's all for the announcement. So I'm gonna go over the guest introduction, and without further ado, let's give the floor to the moderator, Mr. Barry.
Hey, thanks, Hong. My name is Barry. I'm a lead engineer at Groovus, and I'm also a Rails fan. And I'm really excited to talk with my hero, David, because I'm a big fan of his book, Rework, and and the podcast as well, and of course Ruby on Rails, which is my first touch point entering the web development. And I also bought this Shape Up book as well. So my team is actually working in the Shape Up cycle, product development. So that's why I'm really excited today. So a little bit about myself. I started playing with the programming back when I was maybe high school student, like 15 or 16. And I have worked with projects, including web application and data engineering, and also DevOps as well. So that's who I am. So I'm gonna pass my microphone to the Okura-san, who is another moderator today. Okura-san, can you introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Masafumi. I'm a freelance software developer in Japan. I've been doing Rails for almost like 9 years since Rails 3.0. And I'm creator of some gems, including like the JSON serializer gem or like other goodies. And I'm also the chief organizer of Kaiyoung Rails tech conference focusing on Ruby on Rails in Japan. And I really rely on Rails and its great community. So I'm honored to be here today. Thank you.
All right, so for David, I think people already know about David because you guys keep awaiting in this late time and watching this show. But let me need to be introduced about him. So he's a creator of the Ruby on Rails, as you know, and he's a co-founder and the CTO of the Basecamp, and he had published several best-selling books, including It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work, and Remote as well, and Rework as well. So he's also racing Java, I think. So Luman, right, David? So David, do you wanna say something to the Japanese fans?
Yeah, no, it's great to be here and to talk to Japanese fans. I mean, obviously, I owe my entire programming career to the Japanese community and to the Ruby development. It really wasn't until I discovered Ruby that I became the programmer that I really wanted to be. So I owe a great debt of gratitude to the Japanese development community, particularly to Mats for creating Ruby, for the entire Ruby community in Japan that continues to develop the language. And it's great to be here.
Yeah, thanks. So David, if you're ready, we can start the Q&A session now. Are you?
Yes.
All right. So the question we got from the audience, and then so for the audience, if you can post question on the Slido, which is web services you can access from the QR code on the screen. And if you post a question, I can read it, and then if you hit the right button on each question, so it will go up to the top, so I can read it in priority. So and the first question would be, right, well, how the relationship between the Rails and the front end going to be in the future? The Rails 6 introduced the Webpack, but is there a possibility of the Hotwire will be the default of the Rails? Maybe one of the omakase parts of the Rails, the Hotwire will be the one of them, or is it going to be a separate project from the Rails standard? What can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we've gone through so many iterations on the front end with Rails over the years, in part because the front end has changed so much. There's been such a huge churn in the JavaScript community as people are finding out new, different ways to build things, as browsers are catching up to developments in the JavaScript language. But I think we've reached the point where there's room for new ideas. The bundler and transpiling approach that Webpack is a continuation of has been the default for almost 10 years. But we're in a different situation now because browsers have caught up. And you can now use ES6 directly in all the major browsers without transpiling. And I think that opens just some interesting doors to how we do JavaScript development, how we do front-end development, because so much of the complexity today in doing Rails applications comes from the front end. It comes from integration with things like Webpack. And maybe there's a way we can go back to a simpler time without giving up all the capacity that JavaScript has given us. So Hotwire is our approach at Basecamp to doing that. It's a continuation of things we've been doing for over a decade. Things like Turbo Links that we released, I think, back at 2011 maybe, or something like that. We continue to develop and extend it. And Stimulus, our JavaScript framework, also several years old, and now Hotwire is kind of bringing all those things together in a cohesive package that gives you everything you need to build great front end for Rails applications. Like our new email service, hey.com, is built entirely with Hotwire. The front-end package, the JavaScript bundle that we send to customers is only 40 kilobytes, which is just incredibly small. And it's incredibly small because it's a very different technique than using React or Woo or other things like that. The core of Hotwire is to send HTML over the wire. Hotwire is essentially an abbreviation of HTML over the wire, which means that you're focusing more on server-side generation. So there's all these things that are going on. We're building all our applications like this. For sure, Hotwire is going to take the place of TurboLinks in terms of its relationship to Rails. Rails has shipped with TurboLinks by default for many years now. The new default in Rails 7 will be Hotwire, but it will be the new default in the same way that TurboLinks was. It's a part of the gem file. You can opt out. You don't have to do it. There will undoubtedly still be many people who want to use Rails to build React applications or other types of applications. But if you don't have a strong preference, the omakase approach here is that you should try the default, and the default will be Hotwire. Now, how it's going to be the default is still open for debate. Can we get away with not having Webpack by default? Can we get away with using ES6 directly in the browser? This relies in part on something called import maps, which is a new standard that Chrome has been already shipping, but there's not yet support in Safari or in Firefox, although there are polyfills, so you can get that. Import maps essentially gives you a load path for the browser, so you don't have to do compilation. So you can say import star from add hotwire/turbo, and then the import map can translate what add hotwire/turbo means to a specific file, just like you have package.json and the lock file that Yarn gives you to resolve what these dependencies are without having to update all the files. So still trying to figure that out, but even if we are not able to figure it out, or even if we think the polyfill is not good enough, we can still ship Hotwire as the default using Webpack as it is.
Right, cool. So it's going to be maybe the default choice of the omakase, but you can easily opt out like a turbine test. So
yes.
So if you like it, you can keep using it, but if you don't, you can just opt out.
Exactly.
Cool.
And I think that's the good path of omakase that we followed with so many things, that Rails by default should have everything in it, should have all the answers, such that you can build a great application without changing anything. But if you want to change something, if you want to use React instead of Hotwire, if you want to use RSpec instead of Minitest, if you want to use a different kind of backend instead of Active Record, you can do all those things. You can change any individual part of it without having to start from scratch. I think the thing with Rails that continues to be special is that we are committed to an integrated framework, a framework with all the batteries included. And that today, there's not a lot of competition. If you look at most of the things that are happening in JavaScript land, they're all essentially, you just have to put everything together yourself. There's some bootstraps, this, that, and the other thing, but there's no one really focused on doing the full integration where they own all the frameworks themselves as part of a package. And I think that's a real shame. I think there's a huge amount of value where you can make the development experience better, you can increase productivity, if you dare assume responsibility for the whole thing. And I think that this is also where Rails is perhaps even more unique than frameworks like Django or others that historically have gone with batteries included approaches, that they've usually stopped short when it comes to the front end. Rails is saying the front end is part of the application. In fact, much of the argument of Hotwire is that this split up front end versus back end, different teams doing front end, different teams doing back end, is actually not good. It is better if you have a framework that's so fully integrated, a single developer can make an entire feature from top to bottom. They can do the front end, they can do the back end, they can do everything that's needed. And not just a single developer making a single feature, but a single person could make a new, great, competitive web application by themselves. That is something that used to be very true. It still is true in certain areas, but so much of technology today is focused on very narrow niches. That like, hey, you have to be a specialist in this little area, and then you work with a bunch of other specialists, and then you can put something together. I don't think that's good.
Right. So I think that's one of the entities that makes Rails special. So it cares everything for you. So you don't have to be care about like each one of the pieces of the component, but you can just Rails to decide it the first. And then if you don't like it, you can just change it. So I think that's what I like in Rails as well. But I see some people saying that maybe it's kind of difficult to scale the big Rails application into the like enterprise-sized application. I think that's because of the programming. It requires like mature level of the programming, basic knowledge, and I personally think they just want to avoid the spaghetti code or like code. It's really hard to maintain the modules shared with other, the component in the same project. But what do you think about like that opinion? So is it true, or do you think it's still manageable in very size Rails application by large number of the team or people?
I think a fundamental truth is that it is very difficult to write large software applications. That is true whether you write them in Ruby on Rails, whether you write them in Java, whether you write them in Go, Python, Django, whatever. It is very difficult, and it has been difficult since the invention of software development to have very large teams working on software development. Ruby on Rails does a lot to push back against that, does a lot to offer standards and conventions such that it is easier for many developers to work together and use the same patterns than many other environments and languages that give you no guidance and makes it even harder still to do this work on a very large scale. But if you look at the kind of applications that Ruby on Rails have been built with over the years, GitHub, Shopify, Airbnb, Zendesk, Cookpad, Square, Stripe.
Yeah, right.
There's a very, very long list of enormous applications. I think Shopify showed us just recently, Toby tweeted, they have 1.2 million lines of code in the main Shopify application. That is a huge application. And of course, they are going to hit challenges when you're dealing with a 1.2 million line application that is being developed by hundreds or thousands of people that are unique. That is the thing that happens when you reach the outer rims of software development, regardless of which language it is. When you look at, for example, Facebook and their use of PHP, they essentially had to invent their own derivative of PHP to be able to do what they do, because they are at the outlying edges of what is possible in software development. How large can you make an application and still make progress? So these are universal industry-wide challenges, but I can see how someone who might not have had a lot of experience hitting those challenges in other languages would go, oh, it's because of Ruby on Rails, because that's the thing I'm programming in. I'm now facing these challenges, ergo, it must be because of the environment that I'm working with, rather than zooming back and saying, you know what, this is a challenge in all environments. There is no environment on earth that have figured out, oh, it's totally easy to make a 1.2 million line application, have hundreds of developers work in it, and you will have no difficulties at all. Nothing scales like that. The entire profession of software development is essentially one long saga of large software projects failing. I think if you were to sum up the history of large software projects on the scale of millions of lines of code, you would say the vast majority of them have failed. Over the many decades of software development has been a thing. So I think I can see where people are coming from, because when they hit these challenges, it is frustrating. And you look for answers outside of yourself, because it is hard to look inside of yourself and your own organization and say, do you know what? Part of the problem here is that we didn't write good enough software. We didn't have good enough architects setting up our architecture for the software. We didn't take the time to stop and pause and get in a proper direction when things were starting to go wrong, because we were so much in a hurry. Again, this is what happens in all organizations, and we're all looking for someone to blame except for ourselves. So this is why Rails and Ruby must accept that blame, because Ruby on Rails has been phenomenally successful. All these companies I just listed off are these enormous billion-dollar companies with thousands of employees. Almost no other web development framework in the history of software development on the internet have ever achieved this amount of penetration as Ruby on Rails has. So of course, we're also going to get a proportionate amount of people saying, this is bad because I hit trouble.
All right, so problem is not really in the framework itself, but that's because of your teams or skills or workflow, your company culture. The problem is not limited to the framework itself. So I think
and also just the industry. It's not even just like, this is software. This is what software looks like. Software is very, very difficult when you have a million lines of code and hundreds of people working on it. There is no, it's not because we necessarily are bad programmers or we could just write it differently or we could write it better. That is a utopia that's never going to happen. We have to accept that software development at this scale is incredibly hard. No one has figured it out. That doesn't mean that there aren't differences, that you can't do better or worse. You absolutely can. And I think that Rails in particular does really well with this. And one of the reasons is that we have a really active community, including these very large companies. Both GitHub and Shopify in particular have several people on the Rails core team, some on the Ruby core team as well. And they are putting the learnings they have from working on these enormous applications into the framework, making it easier for the next generation of very large companies to take advantage. And then, of course, I think perhaps the more important fact is that these companies we just talked about, the GitHub, the Shopify, the Airbnb, the Zendesk, Square, Cookpad, whatever, they're like the 0.001%. 99.999% of all applications will never encounter those difficulties because they will never write a million lines of code. They will be far smaller. They will deal with much smaller problems. And it just won't be an issue. You can get away with so much less difficulty if you're just 20 people, 50 people, even 100 people. These other companies exist in a completely different sphere that we should be very careful not to overanalyze, not to extract lessons from and think that that is something that applies to everyone. It's absolutely not.
Right. Because the idea of the Ruby on Rails was born back when you're in the 37 signals, maybe, or even before that. So you're the only person developing the entire web application, and you have to deal with everything you have to do to maintain the services. So I think that's the background of the framework. So it's natural to keep, the current format of the framework as well. So I think,
I think this is an important point because I'm biased because obviously this is how Ruby on Rails developed. So I'm going to look back and think that was a great way of doing it. But I do think that if you make something that is simple enough to understand, so that a single person can understand it and do it, you're helping everyone. You're also helping the company that has 1,000 developers, because ultimately all software is written by individual brains. Brains who have to understand everything. And it is better for everyone if we make a framework that is so approachable, simple, understandable that one person can work with it, versus if you go the other way and you make a framework that's designed primarily for companies that have 1,000 employees or 10,000 employees, you're then guaranteed that such a framework is never going to work in a productive, good, healthy manner for a team of 1, a team of 10, a team of 20. So I think the focus of who do we design for is very directional. If you design for the single individual, that can scale to very large applications and companies. If you design for very large applications and very large companies, it's almost guaranteed that it cannot work for smaller teams.
Right.
So David, I once saw your tweet saying the Rails is for your next startup. Is it correct? So Rails is for yourself. But
yes.
Yes,
that is that ideal, right? Because right now I work at a company that's not just one person, right? And I haven't for a very long time been the only person doing Ruby on Rails. That is 18 years ago. So it's a long time ago. Today I work with a large team of great programmers, great operations people, great designers, but I continue to hold that ideal in my head that if I had to start over from scratch and I had to build something entirely by myself, I still want Ruby on Rails to be the ideal framework for that. So I'm at times even to some extent kind of discarding writing Rails for who we are today, or not discarding, but de-emphasizing how we set things up. I don't want Ruby on Rails to end up being a specialist framework in the sense that you have to have a multitude of different people who each understand one little part, and you have to have a team of 10 people to build anything of note. No, I want to be able to think, if I have to start over tomorrow as a single developer, Ruby on Rails is not only going to be a great choice because it's good to start with, but it's going to be so good that as a single developer, I could do Basecamp again. We could start something like Basecamp, or you could start Shopify, or you could start GitHub, or you could start any of these other companies. And the framework would allow you to both start there and to get all the way up to a GitHub or a Shopify. So what happens with a lot of software over time is that it gets more and more complicated because the people who started it end up in more and more complicated situations. And this is one of those key dangers I'm constantly on the lookout for. Let's make sure that even though a bunch of the people who work on Ruby on Rails today don't work as single developers, that's who we are designing for. We cannot design primarily for GitHub, Shopify, or even Basecamp, or even Hey, or even any of these other ones. We have to keep in mind that we're primarily designing for the next startup. That's what's going to keep the framework fresh, understandable, and better for everyone.
Right. Cool.
You recently talked about cognition compression.
Yes.
It's also your key concept of Rails. So it's understandable for one person, one developer.
That is exactly it. And that comes exactly back to the point we originally talked about, which was why Hotwire, why Webpack. I think we've let the front-end JavaScript development get away from us a bit in terms of that conceptual compression. There's so much compression still left to do. And right now, the front-end feels like it's so complicated that you actually have to be a front-end specialist. That in many companies, you cannot do both because it's too complicated and a single person can't keep all that complexity in their head at the same time. So this is why I'm so excited to see whether can we get away from transpiling? Can we get away from bundling? Can we get back to a simpler time where the browser could simply read the file that you had written on the server side directly without a lot of post-processing to it? Because that's going to enable this huge amount of conceptual compression. That's what Hotwire itself is. If you use Stimulus and Turbo, you can build these fantastic modern applications like Hey.com with very little JavaScript code. You don't actually have to be a JavaScript expert to be able to use Hotwire to write wonderful applications that use JavaScript, because you're using these conceptual compressions. You're using conceptual compressions like Turbo and Stimulus to give you this power without having to learn everything there is to learn about the JavaScript ecosystem. And I think that's what continues to fascinate me and what continues to motivate me is that we can, as we move forward, we collect more and more of these conceptual compressions such that the same person can do more. If you wind the clock back to when Ruby on Rails was released in 2004, someone could do quite a lot. Like Rails had things for the database, things for generating HTML. But if you look at what the same person can do today with Ruby on Rails, they can do so much more, because Rails today has so many more conceptual compressions that give them so much more power than what they had in 2004. It's not so much that you couldn't do the same things in 2004, but just that Rails didn't have the answers. Oh, you want to do asynchronous job handling? Well, figure it out. You want to send emails? Figure it out. You want to receive emails? Figure it out, right? You want to do anything on the front end with JavaScript? Figure it out. That the framework didn't have answers for these common questions that most people would ask. And that's the hunt we're constantly on. When someone needs to build a wonderful modern web applications, what do they need? And if they have needs that Rails isn't answering, that's when we should think about whether Rails should. Now, it's not always just because there is a need that Rails needs to answer it. We have certain lines we've tried to keep over the years, make sure that Rails doesn't tip over into mandating how your application feels. or how it looks, which is one of the reasons we've never adopted like login systems, and there are other gems for that, like device and so forth. But for everything that's below that line, everything that's infrastructure level, everything that does not kind of determine how your application looks or feels, Rails should continue to look for those conceptual compressions. And I think right now, the biggest, juiciest target for those conceptual compressions is the front end. It's where the most complexity is. It's where the most needless complexity is. So that's what we need to focus on.
Right, that's cool. So that's one of the reasons that many Japanese startups as well so choose the Rails in the initial, the kickstarting the services. So they maybe have one developer, but they want to have him or have her to do everything for the company. So
yes,
that's maybe the same situation as you back when the 2000-ish maybe. So so let me move on to the next question because we only have 20 minutes. So the people are asking about the remote work. So as you state on your book, so remote it's not really the things in the future, but it's happening. I think that's maybe because of the pandemic things. So I also personally moved from the big city to so here is a remote island in Japan. So there's the beautiful ocean around. So I have moved from the Tokyo to here, but when maybe 3 months ago, and I'm enjoying life here, and I still believe that remote work is the future standard of the developer. It's one of the best, lifestyle. So people are asking about the best practices or successful factors transforming the company to the fully remote company, or transforming development team to the full remote team. And many Japanese companies are struggling transforming into it. So what do you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is one of those great big questions I thought we would have answered earlier. We wrote a book in 2013 called Remote Office Not Required that talked about the fact that we had already at that point spent over a decade working remotely. Our company was founded as a remote company all the way back when I started working with Jason in 2001. I was in Denmark, he was in Chicago, and we started working together, and we've worked like that ever since. So clearly, we first of all have a lot of experience with it, and we've seen those benefits you talk about. I've lived in I've lived in Spain, I've lived in the US, I've lived in Denmark, and I've lived all these places because I didn't have to go into one office. And it's been an amazing lifestyle to be able to have that freedom. But it's not trivial to make the transition, particularly if you're a company that's been around for quite a long time, that have certain habits about using an office. So let me run through some of the big changes that you simply have to make. The one thing is, the number one concern we get from managers when they want to transform to remote work is that they're very concerned that workers will goof off. That if they're not in the office, they will play video games, they will do laundry, they won't work very long. And we have just seen repeatedly, both at our own company and other companies over the years, that is the exact opposite people should fear. They should fear overwork, not underwork. That in most circumstances where you transition to a remote work style, people accidentally or intentionally end up working too much because there's not a clear separation between work and home. When your work is in your home, you can very easily end up being in front of the computer at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and that's not good. It doesn't lead to healthy, happy, productive people over the long term. I know that Japan in particular has quite a challenge with overwork in general, not just remotely, but also in the office. And hopefully this transition to remote work can be one of the ways where that conversation is accelerated, that like it's not good. 40 hours a week is enough. In fact, it's plenty. I try to work 40 hours less in the summer, as in right now, we actually have Fridays off. We work 32 hours a week. Does anyone look at our company and say we don't get enough done with the people we have? We don't have enough influence in the industry. We don't put out enough products? Absolutely not. And I think all of these things come from the fact that it's not about the number of hours you put in. It's about the quality of those hours. And that's where remote work is so powerful, because it increases the quality of the hours. Spending 4 hours remotely where you can sit by yourself, you can close the door, you can really dive deep into hard problems, is worth so much more than spending 4 hours at a busy open office somewhere where you're constantly interrupted and you can't find a flow and you can't find your focus. So when you move to remote setup, you can work less and get more done. It's kind of the magic elixir of work, right? That you don't have to get people to work longer hours. In fact, you have to try to do the opposite. So that's the first thing, is to dismantle this fear that if you go remote, then people will goof off and you won't be able to get the work done. That less work will get done, the business is going to struggle. It just doesn't happen like that. In fact, you have to take active steps to ensure that people know that they don't have to be online all the time. In Europe, they've gone as far as to make it part of the law that employees don't have to answer email on the weekend. And I think this is that kind of idea we have to get into. The second big thing is that you have to make the transition from a verbal meetings culture to a writing culture. It is absolutely essential that you transform from having meetings as the primary tool for collaboration and for dissemination of information, and you move to writing. Almost everything, whether it's a new project update, it's a new initiative, should start in writing. Because when you start in writing, you allow people to work together asynchronously. So someone can be deeply focused on their work from 9 o'clock to 11 o'clock. They just block out those 2 hours. And then when they come back up at 11 o'clock, they can check things, they can read things out. If they had a day where they show up at 9 a.m. and then at 10 o'clock there's a meeting, there's only 1 hour where you can get any work done. A lot of programmers will look at that hour and go like, you know what, it's not even worth it.
Exactly.
I can't even get into the flow. I can't understand the problem I'm working with. I'm not even going to bother. I'm just going to answer email. So now you have your meeting at 10, then you're done at 11, and then it's lunch at noon. You go like, that's another hour. I don't know. Now you've wasted half a day. So when you go asynchronous, when you switch from meetings to writing, you allow people to put together their own workday in a way that works for them. Now, transitioning from meetings to writing is very difficult. And it's very difficult for several reasons. One of the primary ones is this notion that everything is a hurry, that everything needs to happen right now. In the books we've written in Rework, we call it ASAP is poison, as soon as possible. Right?
Yeah.
That there's this notion that like, we have to have a call right now and you have to jump on it right now. No, almost never is anything urgent unless the application is on fire and customers are screaming because they can't access their data. Almost everything can wait until tomorrow. And that's a very difficult transition for people to make who've been stuck in this notion that it has to be ASAP. We're constantly changing direction. I'm constantly talking to someone about something new that they have to do. But if you make that transition and you get to this place where collaboration primarily happens through written form, it's the magic wonderland. It's what enables the long stretches of uninterrupted time. It's what unleashes this creativity that you see. It's what allows you flexibility in your day to make things work in a better, more healthy way. So I'd focus on those two things. Focus on making the quality hours count, showing executives and managers that they don't have anything to fear. The work will still get done. In fact, more work will be done. In fact, they have to make sure people don't overwork. And then the second part of it, transition from meetings to a written culture. Write first, meetings last.
I think that asynchronous communication is a key of the success factor. And I guess, so especially in the Japanese traditional companies, there's a culture like, let's do the meeting now, right? So you don't have to do meeting right now, but just let's gather and then talk about that, right? So, but it means you miss the chance to think and focus on one thing and focus on the problem first, and then maybe if there's a need, you can talk about that in the meeting.
Yes.
But you just have to first think about yourself, maybe alone in the closing door in the single room. So that's what I realized since I started remote work. Yeah. So
I have a question to David. So I know that the importance of transition from meeting to writing, but what do you think about the emotional connection and solitude we feel when we work remotely?
Yes, that's hugely important, and I should actually have had that in as the third factor, because just because you work remotely does not mean you don't want to see other people. It's a basic human need that we do need to see other people on a regular basis. It just doesn't have to happen at the office, and it doesn't have to happen for 8 hours a day. First, I'd say that what we found is that remote work works best for people who have some amount of social circle outside of work or overlapping with work, whether it is that they have a family or they go to a co-working office, not to sit in an open office, but some of the time they go work at a coffee shop. They are around other people. I think if you're just by yourself day in and day out, that's not going to work out. People are social animals, and there's a reason why solitary confinement in prison is considered torture. That it is very difficult for humans to do that over the long stretches. But I think part of the equation here is to realize it's not either or. It's not either you spend all your time in an office or you never see any other humans. There's space in between where you can see humans sometimes on video chat. But use that sparingly. I think one of the things a lot of people and companies have found during the pandemic is that video chat is actually, it's amazing in one way and horrible in another way. It's amazing that you can actually get much of the same information conveyed, but it's horrible in the sense that if you do it too much, it feels like it's fake. It feels like the humans aren't actually humans. And being in person with someone else is quite important. So at Basecamp, the other thing we've done before the pandemic was that twice a year, we would gather the whole company for a week, where the only point was to reestablish these human bonds, to recharge the human batteries, to be together. And I think that what we found doing that was that when you do that on a regular basis, even if it's only once every 6 months, it makes a huge difference. Now, during the pandemic, we haven't been able to do that. So it's been more than a year and a half. And we've had all sorts of problems because of that. All sorts of problems because people haven't had the chance to see each other as humans, as you do in person. And I think it is a big problem. So even when you're enthusiastic about remote work, you still have to consider the fact that yes, it's great most of the time, but you have to pair it with humanity. You have to pair it with preferably the ability to see your coworkers in the flesh at regular intervals. And if you can't do that, then you at least have to substitute that with something else, whether it's family, whether it's friends, whether it's co-working facilities, it's going out to lunch, it's doing these other things where you see other people. We will go mad if we just sit in a home office by ourselves day in and day out.
Right. So you don't have to be extremely on each one side, but you can keep balance between them. So you can just is that like every 6 months in Basecamp to do the whole company meetup, the physical event?
Yes,
Right.
for almost since we started, at least for over 10 years before the pandemic, the whole company would meet every 6 months. And I mean, we're not just remote in terms of like one country. We're remote with people all over the world. And we would fly everyone in still to spend time together for a week. And it was totally worth it. Totally worth it, even though it's expensive to do that, but the payback you get from establishing those human bonds and topping off is totally worth it. But even so, I mean, it's not like that's the only thing, right? Like that's something that happens every 6 months, and I think it is very important, but you also have to pair it with other things for each individual person. And I think that's what the pandemic has made particularly hard for a lot of people who perhaps didn't live with family, is that those normal things they would have done, whether they would go to an office or some people would work out of a library or they would go to a co-location office, they couldn't do that. And I think that has put an incredible mental burden on a lot of people that shows how important it is that we see other humans and we use those bonds. And we don't forget that just because we can be productive with remote work without it, it is not long-term sustainable, because humans are social animals.
Right. So if possible, can you tell us what you guys are doing in the event, doing every 6 months, right? You guys do like whole company meeting or like more like group work of the each teams?
We do all of it. So we do both company-wide meetings where we all sit together and talk. I mean, our company at its largest was just under 60 people. So it's not like we're gathering 10,000 people. We can still fit in one place. Although there are companies that also do that, gather thousands of people and make that work. But some of it is to just spend time together. A lot of it is like playing games. So we would meet for a week and we would play games together. We would sit and talk together about all sorts of things that aren't necessarily directly related to work. We would eat a lot of food together. We would do activities together. We've gone go-karting, we've gone to museums, we've gone all sorts of other, just spend time together without having, here's a target, we have to do this. So it's almost like, almost half vacation, half work. And the part that's work is we're just doing the things that feels good to do together. So the main focus is simply just to spend time together. And whatever can make that happen is important. It's not important that like, oh, what do we get out of it? It's just well, I mean, we do it every 6 months. So it's 2 weeks out of the year. That's not that much time. It's more important that we use those 2 weeks such that the other 50 weeks out of the year count for more, and that people see each other as humans. They don't just see each other as avatars or names in a chat or something else. They can remember what that person is like.
Right. I think that's interesting because a lot of companies in Japan are trying to do the same thing, but their focus is not really interaction, like human interaction, but they are trying to produce something the worth of the time, worth of the cost. Right. So they're trying to like keep, we're gonna do like mission, we're gonna fix a mission statement where we're gonna do the whole company goals.
I think it's important to figure out, why are you doing this? Why are you gathering everyone up? It's not like whatever you can do in a week, it's not going to be that important compared to what you can do in 50 weeks. Gathering up people is an investment in the social bonds that keep the company cohesive and working, frankly, because the more these social bonds fray, the more likely you are to have conflict, the more likely you are to have misunderstandings, the more likely people are essentially going to grow unhappy with their work situation. So making an investment in that, in the human bonds, is totally worth it. It does not need another payoff. It doesn't need some outcome. Oh, we made this system, or we changed these things. Don't think of it like that. Don't think about the return on investment, as you would say, is what you got out of that week in terms of something concrete. No. It's what you get out of it for the rest of the year.
Right. That's So you don't have to do anything like official company meeting, but just gather people and then let people interact with each other. So that essentially, that will be the increase in productivity in the future, maybe, or like you can just
Yes.
Right. That's weird because we are human. We need to communicate with each other, right?
Yes.
Yes. So yeah. So we just got announcement from the Folkways team. We only have 10 minutes from now, so I will move on to the next question. So this question will be you as a programmer, right? So as you keep developing for a long time, you will feel like you are not growing as fast as you were before. What the successful factors or keys to keep growing, and what you are doing with for that?
That's a great question. Something I've thought a lot about, not just in programming, but in a lot of other domains, whether it's race car driving or photography or whatever. In many ways, I envy beginners because it's so fun to make these huge steps forward in your technique and in your skill on a regular basis. That is just invigorating, and it's one of my favorite things. It's why it's great to continue to learn new things, because that feeling of being a total beginner, don't know anything, and then making those steps forward is intoxicating. I think it's the easiest way to get access to this state of flow where you forget time and space and whatever. So it's harder when you get better, but by no means is it impossible. I learn something about programming almost every single time I sit down and program. Part of the challenge is to make sure that you treat every opportunity as an exercise, as a learning, not just doing something because you know how to do it and just let's do that again. Try something different. I wonder if this could be different, not because it has to, not because the program necessarily is going to be better, but just for your own satisfaction and enjoyment. I spend an enormous amount of time whenever I write a piece of code. I get it to work, I get it to pass the tests, I get it to go fast enough. Then I go back and think about all the ways I could write it differently, write it better, write it clearer, come up with better names. One of my favorite programming tools is the dictionary and the thesaurus, looking up different names, finding different things in the domain model. So that's really important, is you approach your own work, even now that you're good enough that you can make anything happen, as though it's still a learning opportunity. Experiment, try different things, even though you don't have to. You do it simply for the pleasure of learning from your own work. Then the other part of it is exposing yourself to different ways of doing things. This is why I love code reviews. I love doing code reviews we mainly use GitHub to do it, because I get to see how someone else thinks. And sometimes even a total beginner will think very differently than me, and I will learn something, even though I'm supposedly there to overview their code and be a mentor for them. It just works the other way as well, if you look for it. I think the number one danger of becoming really good at something is to develop an ego that tells you that you don't have anything left to learn, that you're already good enough, you're already better than everyone else. That is absolutely toxic to your continued learning and, in my opinion, satisfaction of doing this craft. So you just have to accept that once you reach certain levels, like, it slows down. You're not going to be advancing as quickly as you were when you were just learning, and that's okay. That's the price you pay from becoming really good at something, is that the incremental improvements, they come slower, but they will continue to come. If I look back at the programmer I was 5 years ago or 10 years ago, I'm a much better programmer today than I was then, because I've continued doing that work, treating the work itself as a learning opportunity, trying to constantly check the ego of, like, you know what? So what if I've been programming Ruby for 20 years? I have new stuff to learn. There are new techniques. There are different ways we can do things. This is also one of the reasons I seek out all sorts of other technology, even though I don't necessarily use it at work. I enjoy just spending time learning whatever Kubernetes or Docker or Elasticsearch or other storage engines or setups, even though I'm like, you know what, it's not going to be the thing I work on most of the time. But getting those impulses and influences from other domains and other pieces of technology is really important, such that you generate new ideas. You might see something that was done in a different language or different technology, and you go like, huh, actually, I wonder if we could do that here too. We could put our own twist on it. And then the other thing, at least for me, is I learned the most when I kind of start something new. So we just did hey.com, our new email service, spent about 2 years developing it. And we've already extracted tons of code into Rails. I'm not even halfway done. It's where much of the development for Hotwire came from. There's just so much work in it. So giving yourself new challenges and putting yourself in front of new challenges, that's a key part of making sure you're still staying interested. If you just keep doing the same thing in the same way, day in and day out, yeah, you're going to stagnate. You're going to hit a plateau, and it's not going to be as fun. And no, you got to shake it up.
Right. I'm curious about how much time are you spending your time to trying the new stuff out of the work? Like in general, how much time are you spending with?
It really depends on the phase I'm in. So, for example, when we started working on Hey, I had to spend my time learning a lot of things that I didn't actually know that well in detail. One of the things was how we were going to process huge amount of inbound mail. In Basecamp, we send 5 million emails per day, but it's all outbound. It's all transactional. It's all just action mailers sending things out. Receiving email, parsing email, dealing with email on the way in is much more difficult. So I had a lot of work. I had to experiment with that. And there was a thrill. It was a thrill to, even though I'm not a beginner in programming at large, I was a beginner at that. And that's the thing that you can continue to get those exhilarating moments where you feel like you're learning a lot, is to seek out an area of programming where, you know what, like I'm not an expert here. Front-end programming is a great example too. I mean, I've done JavaScript programming for, 25 years to some extent. But I've had these phases where I haven't really focused on it. And then when we started working on Hotwire and Stimulus and Turbo and so on, I really got into JavaScript development again. And I was a beginner in some of it. Not a beginner as a programmer, but a beginner in this domain. And it was great. It was great to get this feeling of like, I don't know all the answers. I have to figure out new ways of finding those answers. And in my pursuit of those new answers, given the background that I have, very often I would come up with different answers than what the rest of the industry or other people were coming up with. So putting yourself in front of those new challenges, I think, is the easiest way to learn something new. Now, it's always a bit of a double-edged sword, because what also happens sometimes is that programmers correctly realize what I've just told, that it's really fun to play with new things. And then they want to play with all the new things all the time. So whatever new application they start, they want to use the bleeding edge framework, the bleeding edge language, the bleeding edge database, and they want to do all of it at once. I think that's a bad idea because you're going to end up being a beginner at everything. That's not a good way to go. For Hey, for example, we use total stock vanilla Rails. We didn't try to introduce a new. We continue to just use MySQL with Active Record, as we've done for 20 years, because that was not an area that was important for us to, quote unquote, innovate in. That database works. Active Record is an incredible framework that has 2 decades worth of improvement in it. That's not where we need to invent anything new. Inbound email processing. Oh, okay. Actually, we do need to invent something new there. That's how we came up with Action Mailbox, which then got put into Rails. So you have to pick and choose. You can't say, I'm going to do everything from scratch. I'm going to do everything new all the time. Pick like 1 or 2 things, and then base that on the fact that, you know what, I'm going to take those 2 new ideas. They're speculative. It might not work. I perhaps should think about having a backup plan if one of them doesn't work. And then I'm going to have a solid core where I'm using things I just know, that are not full of unknowns, right? Like I can just like, do you know what? I've much of the Rails code in Hey is the same Rails code I've written for 2 decades. There's not like a lot of deep innovation in it because it didn't need that. And that meant I could focus my attention on, like, for example, the front end with the Hotwire, or the inbound mail processing with Action Mailbox. Like, focus on a couple of things and then have the stability of everything else.
So that's why you introduced Hotwire to the head as well, but not just the entire framework with the still Rails, and they keep using the default choices, but only introduce a few new things to.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Yep. So I think it's about the time of this event. So let me wrap up. So I'd like to say a big thank to David for taking your time to share your knowledge and insight. And also thank you for Okura-san Masafumi for moderating with me, and also all the audiences for active participation. I hope I picked questions on the Slido. So yes, so live stream has been recorded on YouTube. So those who wish someone else could have seen it, feel free to share it with them. So it's a late time in Japan, so you can share it to your colleagues and friends who are also a DHH fan like me. So lastly, there's an announcement from the Folkwell home. Do you wanna show up to the stage?
Right. Thank you, Mr. David. Thank you, Mr. David. Thank you, Mr. Okura, Mr. Barry, for today's wonderful event. I would like to announce that the 4th event of the Global Dev Study will be held on 6th of July, 7:30 until 9:30 p.m. Japan time. We'll have Sebastian Ramirez, the creator of Fast API, and Wilwen Lerner, the author of Python Workout, joining us. So everyone can register for the event from the Folkwell Campus webpage. So once again, thank you everyone, and we hope to see you again in our next event.
Thanks again.